In the autumn of 1954, Jessie Roestenberg was living an unassuming life in rural Staffordshire in England. She and her husband Tony, a Dutch immigrant, resided with their 3 young children in a small cottage at Vicarage Farm near the village of Ranton. The area was remote and rustic. Their old farmhouse had no electricity or indoor plumbing, a place nearly frozen in time, and the nearest neighbours were about 2 miles away, underscoring the isolation of the homestead. Britain was emerging from the post-war era, and like many others, the Rustenbergs were focused on family and daily jobs, with little reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. Yet the early 1950s were also the dawn of the flying saucer age, and ever since the term was coined in 1947, reports of strange objects in the sky had captured the public's imagination, and by 1954, UFO sightings were being reported across Europe and beyond. Jessie Roestenberg was not a sci-fi enthusiast or a seeker of limelight. She was a 29-year-old housewife and mother of 3, tending to her children on a typical day. That day would turn from ordinary to extraordinary in a matter of moments, leaving an indelible mark on UFO lore and local history. It was October 21st, 1954, at approximately 4:45 p.m. The late afternoon was calm and fading into dusk as Jessie went about her routine inside the cottage. Her 2-year-old daughter, Karen, was with her inside, and while her sons Anthony, aged 8, and Ronald, aged 6, played in the front garden after school. Suddenly, an uncanny sound shattered the quiet. A loud, hissing roar, like an aircraft crash, or as if water was being poured into a fire, as Jessie later described. Alarmed, her first thought was for her children's safety. She rushed outside and was met with an astonishing sight. Her 2 boys were sprawled on the grass, staring upwards in terror. They were saying, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer." Jessie's initial instinct was to suspect the children were playing a prank or imagining things, but as she opened her mouth to reassure them, or maybe scold them, she felt a peculiar sensation, an overwhelming urge to look up. And above the farm hovered a huge, disc-shaped object, tilted slightly at an angle. Jessie later likened its appearance to a giant Mexican hat without the tassels. It was a bright metallic silver colour, the classic flying saucer shape with a domed top, and it hung motionless and silent in the air, perhaps 15 to 20 yards away from her, just above the roofline of the house. Jessie stood transfixed by the sight. The object's dome had a transparent front section, rather like a windscreen or a large window, and through this she could clearly see 2 figures inside the craft. In her stunned state, it took a moment to register what she was looking at. The figures appeared humanoid, but not human in any ordinary sense.
It was stationary, this thing, and it was bright silver in colour, and it had a dome. It was tilted to sort of, I could see the occupants in it.
You saw people in it?
I saw people in it. There were 2 people in there. These people were beautiful people. That's the only way I can describe them. They had long golden hair, like a page boy bob, just like the old kings. You used to see photographs of the old kings. And the colour of the hair was golden. Now, I was really...
What were they dressed in?
They had a sort of a polo-neck jumper affair, like a ski top suit.
They looked to be male, and their faces were humanoid but striking, with very large, high foreheads and slender features concentrated in the lower half of their faces. Both wore identical one-piece suits of a powdery pale blue or turquoise colour, tight-fitting like ski suits or jerseys. On their heads they seemed to have a kind of transparent helmet, like a fishbowl over their heads, Jessie would say. They didn't smile. In fact, their expressions were very solemn, but not hostile. Jessie perceived in their faces something like empathy or concern. Their eyes exuded compassion, she later recounted. For a few seconds that felt stretched in time, woman and visitors regarded each other across a brief span of sky. Jessie was absolutely paralytic with fear, rooted to the spot.
But I was just mesmerised for what seemed to be, ages, but it could have only been seconds. And I turned to sort of look down at the boys, was unaware that they were with me, because I was so absorbed. And the next thing, I looked up and it was gone.
Finally, adrenaline broke through her shock. A surge of pure fear hit Jessie, and she did what any protective mother might do, and she screamed to her kids to get up, and she herself bolted in panic. In terror, Jessie turned and ran back towards the cottage, ushering the boys to get inside, and for an instant she lost sight of the object. Reaching the back of the house, she dared to glance over her shoulder, and the shining disc had moved from its hovering point and was now gliding silently over the rooftop of the cottage. No sooner had Jessie gathered the children near the rear door than the object began to depart, and with a quiet whoosh, it tilted and accelerated, shooting off at high speed into the darkening sky. In the blink of an eye, the silvery craft vanished from view beyond the tree line. Jessie held her shaking boys, attempting to collect herself, and in the sudden stillness, she wondered if she had imagined the entire thing. But the wide-eyed fear in Anthony's and Ronald's faces told her it was no hallucination. They had all witnessed the same incredible sight. Any doubt that something real had happened was further dispelled by her physical state. Her heart was racing, her knees were weak, and she noticed an odd tingling sensation in her body as if an electric charge had hung in the air. Jessie would later describe feeling tingles in the lead-up to the encounter as well. The entire episode was so fantastical that Jessie knew many would find it utterly unbelievable. She herself struggled to process it. I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous, she confided, but every word of it is true. Tentatively, mother and children crept back toward the front garden, drawn by both curiosity and the need to verify that the object was truly gone. To their astonishment, as they scanned the skies, they spotted the UFO once more. The disc had not gone far. It had swooped back towards the vicarage farm, and this time was coming from the north. Jessie and the boys watched, mouths agape, as the craft proceeded to circle their house in a wide arc. In Jessie's first report, she said it made about 1.5 revolutions around the farm before streaking away for good. Years later, she would recall it circled 3 times. Whether 1.5 or thrice, the point was the object clearly manoeuvred around the farm with purpose before departing. With a final flash of purple-blue light from its front, the saucer shot vertically upward at tremendous speed and disappeared into the clouds. This time, it did not return. Jessie and her children were left in a state of profound shock, and by now dusk had truly fallen, and as the first stars began to prick the sky, Jessie stood in her yard, trying to comprehend what she had seen. Above her, nothing but an empty, silent firmament remained. 8-year-old Anthony tugged her sleeve, pleading to go back inside. 6-year-old Ronald was in tears. They all hurried indoors. Jessie secured the doors and checked on little Karen, who, mercifully, had stayed in her cot, oblivious to all the drama outside. That evening, the family sat together, shaking and wide-eyed. The boys were too scared to even fetch coal from outside or to let the dog out, and Jessie herself was too agitated to even eat or rest. She kept replaying the vision in her mind, the disc, the beautiful, long-haired figures gazing down, the strange hiss, the way the craft moved. What did we see? She wondered aloud. In the immediate aftermath of the encounter, Jessie faced a dilemma. Should she report what happened? In 1954, admitting that you saw a flying saucer carrying alien occupants wasn't exactly a ticket to instant credibility, and she feared ridicule or disbelief. But nonetheless, Jessie decided that what she and the children experienced was important, and she must share it. Perhaps others had seen something that day, or perhaps authorities should know. She contacted the local press to recount the incident. The Wolverhampton Express and Star, a regional newspaper, sent a reporter the very next day. And on October 22nd, 54, the paper ran a headline, "Midland woman says flying saucer men terrified her." In the article, Jessie described the encounter in detail for the first time publicly. She told the Express and Star about the disc hovering over her garden, and the two unsmiling human-like creatures with long faces and long hair visible inside, and how the object zoomed away at high velocity. The newspaper printed Jessie's own sketch of the UFO, a dome-topped saucer, noting that it appeared to be made of dull silver metal with a revolving outer rim. A press photographer captured an image of Jessie standing with her sons in the garden, pointing to the spot in the sky where the saucer had hovered. That photo spoke volumes. The family's anxious faces made it clear that something really had frightened them. News of this encounter spread quickly. Other newspapers picked up the story from the Express and Star's report. It was unusual enough to claim a spot in the era's growing catalogue of UFO encounters. Yet it also carried a human interest angle, a mother and children, alone on a farm, seemingly visited by cosmic strangers. In the days following, curiosity seekers and investigators began to reach out. Amongst the first was Gavin Gibbons, a local researcher and author with an interest in the flying saucer phenomenon. Gibbons visited the Rustenberg cottage roughly 3 weeks later and found the family still on edge. He noted that Jessie appeared highly strained and nervous, and her husband Tony, who hadn't witnessed that original event, was also very anxious about the whole affair. The children too were skittish. Gibbons wrote, "It was evident that something most unusual had occurred." He could see no motive for the family to fabricate such a bizarre tale, and they had gained nothing but sleepless nights and local notoriety from it. Indeed, Tony was growing weary of the situation completely and often expressed regret that it had ever happened. The family earned no money from the story, and Jessie only wanted people to know that she was telling the truth, regardless of whether they chose to believe it. Jessie's own health and demeanour in the aftermath gave some insight into the toll that such an encounter can take. For days she was jumpy and struggled with nightmares, and in the weeks after she developed mysterious blotchy rashes on her face and arms and suffered bouts of extreme fatigue. At one point her condition worsened enough that she insisted on seeing a doctor who had heard about her UFO sighting and was sceptical. This doctor actually referred her to a psychiatrist, likely suspecting stress or trauma. The psychiatrist, after evaluation, reportedly told her, "There's nothing wrong with your mind, but you do need to go to a hospital." Concerned by her symptoms, they conducted a blood test and found Jessie's white cell count was dangerously low. The hospital staff were baffled, telling her they wouldn't be surprised if she was suffering from radiation sickness. This alarming diagnosis was never confirmed with certainty, but it raises eyebrows, doesn't it? Had she been exposed to some form of radiation during the encounter, like so many others have in other stories? Jessie herself was terrified by this health scare, but she thankfully recovered in time. It left her convinced that whatever the craft was, it had a real physical effects and a presence. As weeks turned into months, life for the family slowly normalised on the surface. But they couldn't forget October the 21st, 1954. The children, as young as they were, gradually put the fright out of mind, and by 55, Jessie noted that the boys had pretty much forgotten the incident, which she felt was for the best. Jessie and Tony, however, remained haunted and also oddly enriched by the experience. Once the acute fear subsided, they found themselves wishing they could see the mysterious visitors again. In fact, in the years following, they did see more strange things in the sky, as we'll see later, but the family's relationship to their home never really healed. Tony, in particular, felt that the old farmhouse had been somehow tainted by this UFO's presence. Ever since that UFO hovered over it, something snapped there and almost made us snap too, he told Gibbons. By early 55, they decided to move out of Vicarage Farm completely. In the wake of that close encounter, the family, perhaps by heightened awareness or maybe uncanny coincidence, had several further sightings of unexplained aerial objects over the next few years. These additional incidents, though less dramatic than seeing alien figures at close range, reinforced Jessie's conviction that something unusual really was going on in the skies over Staffordshire. Just 3 days after the original encounter, on Sunday, October 24th of 1954, Tony had his own sighting. He'd been rather sceptical of his wife's account at first. After all, he wasn't there to see it. But that Sunday he found himself feeling a queer hunch that he needed to look at the sky, almost as if he might glimpse what Jessie saw. And acting on this intuition, Tony climbed up to the roof of the cottage, ostensibly to check if the flying saucer had dropped something or caused any damage, and scanning the sky he suddenly caught sight of a bizarre object to the southwest. There, flying slowly along in a great semicircle, was an enormous, cylindrical-shaped object. He shouted down to Jessie, yelling for his wife and a visiting friend to come out, and together they watched this huge cigar-shaped craft cruise silently across the sky about a mile away. It was massive, Jessie later said. It was colossal in comparison to the disk that she had seen. Perhaps a mothership of some sort. The friend initially thought he saw wing-like structures on the cylinder, suspecting it might have been a conventional aircraft, but after observing longer, he withdrew that idea. It didn't have wings, and it did not move like an aeroplane. The long object eventually disappeared into a bank of clouds. When Tony asked Jessie if the cylindrical craft was what she saw 3 days earlier, she shook her head no. The thing on the 21st was much smaller and disc-shaped. Maybe Jessie's sighting was a scout ship, Tony mused. Perhaps this was the cigar-shaped mothership coming to check on things. This second encounter transformed Tony from skeptic into a believer. He became intensely interested in UFOs, keeping a constant watch on the skies thereafter. His vigilance was rewarded. Late that year, Tony was outdoors and he noticed an eerie orange-red fireball moving slowly across the sky at about a 45-degree elevation. Intrigued, he walked around to the other side of the house, keeping it in view, and was astonished to see that the light was much, much larger at the other side. This suggested to him that the orb had come significantly closer very, very quickly. The silent orange ball then almost stopped in mid-air, remaining nearly stationary as Tony watched in awe, and he heard the distant buzz of an approaching RAF plane coming from the east. The moment the conventional aircraft came into view, the mysterious fireball reacted. It suddenly moved, shooting northward at incredible speed, vanishing from sight within seconds. These continuing sightings extended into the next couple of years, even after the Rustenbergs moved to the town of Stafford. Gavin Gibbons, who remained close to the family, noted at least 3 further incidents in 56 and 57. In one case, December 5th, 56, Jessie's daughter Karen, then 4 years old, ran into the house crying out to her mother, reminiscent of how the boys had summoned Jessie in 54. Jessie hurried outside and saw a bright orange disc hovering over their new house in Stafford. This time, neighbours also saw the same object before it zoomed off towards a nearby airfield. Another instance in January of 57 involved an orange glowing cigar-shaped craft flying north over Stafford towards Stoke-on-Trent. Among the many witnesses were Tony, Jessie, Karen, and a local UFO club leader who knew the family. And then on May 13th of 57, Jessie, along with a neighbour, a Mrs. Violet Wilding, and others, spotted a silvery cigar-shaped UFO over western Stafford. These multiple sightings earned Jessie the distinction of being at the centre of one of Britain's earliest repeat UFO cases. Importantly, none of these subsequent sightings brought the family any fame or fortune either. They were quietly reported to investigators, but they didn't become front-page news. If anything, the Rustenbergs grew more private about these experiences. Tony was well weary of the notoriety and often declined completely to talk about it. They moved on with life as best they could, and by the late 50s the case had faded from the headlines, living on mainly in UFO research circles through the reports and books that they publish. Gavin Gibbons documented this case extensively in his book The Coming of the Spaceships, devoting 2 full chapters to the Rustenberg sightings. This book, which treated flying saucers as literal extraterrestrial craft, became a foundational source for later writers. Gibbon's dramatic retelling, even coining exotic terms like Vimana for saucer and Vunu for cigar shape, drawn from ancient Sanskrit, reinforcing the sense that the Rustenbergs had indeed seen alien vehicles. He explicitly compared Jessie's visitors to the benevolent space brother type aliens described by American contactee George Adamski. In Gibbon's view, Jessie's close encounter was historic. It provided a rare glimpse of the pilots of these mysterious craft, and in a manner far more credible to him than many other tales. Another early chronicler was the Flying Saucer Review, Britain's leading UFO journal, and in 1955, investigator Wilfred Daniels investigated Jessie and learned that she believed herself to have some psychic sensitivity. Daniels published an article in the Flying Saucer Review speculating that perhaps people with psychic abilities might attract flying saucer encounters, positing that aliens might choose such individuals for contact. And we can look back at our previous video of Joyce Bowles and her encounter with a similar Nordic-type alien. And she too said that she had some kind of psychic abilities herself. And of course, look at what's happening in America with Skywatcher and Jake Barber and all of his psionic operatives calling in UFOs with this so-called dog whistle. The link between psychic and UFO/UAP sightings is becoming stronger and stronger. This angle, however, was downplayed by others. Gibbons, who had cooperated with Daniels on investigating the case, deliberately omitted Jessie's spiritualist experiences from his accounts. He felt that mixing ESP or spiritualism into the story would muddy the waters and invite skepticism. Indeed, some UFO historians later noted the Rustenberg case had an Adamski smell of contactee mysticism that made the hardcore skeptics raise an eyebrow. But despite these debates, Jessie's story took on a life of its own in UFO lore, often cited as one of the classic early close encounters in Britain. After the initial flurry of interest in the 50s, public attention to the case waned. It wasn't until the 70s, where there was something of a UFO revival, that Jessie's encounter re-emerged before a wider audience. The catalyst was a wave of new UFO incidents, like the famous Pascagoula abduction in America of 73, and a growing pop culture fascination with extraterrestrials, which led journalists and filmmakers to revisit older cases. And in 1975, a Gold Key Comics publication even featured a short comic story about Jessie's encounter titled The Unsmiling Men, presenting the tale in illustrated form for younger readers. But the most significant boost actually came from television, as it always does, and in 1976, BBC producer Hugh Burnett set out to make a documentary on UFOs, and in researching the cases he contacted Flying Saucer Review for leads, and of course they pointed him to Jessie. He managed to track down Jessie, who was then living a quiet life and seldom had spoken publicly about the incident in years. The resulting documentary, titled Out of This World, aired in 1977, and in it a middle-aged Jessie Roestenberg appeared on camera to recount her 1954 encounter.
Staffordshire's had a whole crop of flying saucers. Spots in the sky, lights in the sky, strange things. But the strangest of all was seen one day over this cottage. Mr. and Mrs. Rustenberg were living there, quietly, out in the country. And, well, you just tell me what you saw.
Well, this was one ordinary day. I was waiting for my husband to come home from work, and my two sons went to Staffordshire to school, and I was getting changed, and I heard this terrific noise. It was just like a giant cauldron of water being poured onto a fire, a shh sort of noise, you know. And my first reaction was, oh, the children. I thought maybe a plane was crashing or something like that. And I slipped my jumper on and went outside to find my two sons lying flat on the ground in the garden in front of the house, shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, there's a flying saucer."
Viewers were struck by her straightforward, sincere manner. There were no wild claims of cosmic prophecies or secret messages. She calmly described exactly what she'd seen. The Mexican hat craft, the beautiful people with long golden hair, and the fear and the awe that she felt. The programme treated her story respectfully, and Jessie's evident genuineness left an impression on the audience. Many who saw it commented on how credible and convincing she appeared, simply telling her experience with conviction and without dramatic embellishment. This appearance largely revived public interest in this case, and it introduced a new generation to the story, and soon clips of the interview began circulating, and much later finding their way onto YouTube, of course. In 1980, the case received another boost from none other than science fiction luminary Arthur C. Clarke. Clarke, though a famed writer, also hosted a television series called Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, which explored unexplained phenomena in a rigorously open-minded but scientific tone. And in the episode on UFOs from 1980, Clarke included Jessie Roestenberg's encounter as a notable case. Jessie appeared yet again on television recounting the story, now nearly 26 years later. Observers noted that her description on Clarke's show closely matched what she'd said in 77, sometimes even word for word. Jessie was animated but a bit more reserved in this interview, perhaps accustomed now to telling the tale.
A huge Mexican hat. It was that shape without the bubbles. It must have been 15 to 20 yards from where I stood. It covered the roof, so in circumference it must have been about 60 feet. It was enormous.
She demonstrated how the saucer tipped at an angle, allowing the occupants to gaze down, and how it silently circled the farm before zooming off. And by this time, Jessie was in her early 50s, and to many viewers, she came across as a sensible, down-to-earth English grandmother. Hardly the type to fabricate spaceman stories. Through these media spotlights, the story transcended its local origins and entered the annals of UFO legend worldwide. It's since been cited in numerous books and documentaries. British ufologist Jenny Randalls interviewed Jessie in 1987 to get a fresh perspective for her research into close encounters. Randalls was pleased to find that Jessie hadn't turned into a UFO nut, as she put it, or sought fame. In fact, Jessie had avoided reading UFO books after 54, intentionally not letting others' tales influence her memory. Her recollections to Randalls remained consistent in core details. There's one charming anecdote that Jessie did share. She'd seen Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and she'd pretty much enjoyed it. But when the little grey aliens appeared on screen, she almost stood up in the theatre and shouted, "They're not like that!" In her mind, aliens weren't little green or grey men at all, but tall, beautiful, human-like beings, as she had witnessed for herself. Jessie lived out her life firm in her belief, and that she had genuinely encountered something not of this earth. In a 1996 interview with a local Staffordshire newspaper, she reflected, "To this day, I don't know what they were. I don't believe they wanted to do us any harm. They're far more intelligent than we are." She remained mystified and respectful towards the visitors that she remembered. Jessie passed away in 2017 at the age of 91. And to the very end, she stood by her story. Her legacy is that of an earnest witness who in a single surreal afternoon went from tending a garden of an old farmhouse to confronting a cosmic unknown. Introducing the Eerie's Vault Patreon page, a treasure trove of research notes, newspaper and magazine clippings, exclusive on-location video content, early access to public videos, and access to the Eerie Isles interactive Google map with countless sighting and encounter locations for you to peruse at your leisure. This will be updated each time a new video is released and will become one of the most comprehensive encounters maps in the world. With membership options from as little as £1 per month. What are you waiting for? Head over to the vault. More than 70 years later, this case remains extremely interesting and it's hotly debated. Could there be a prosaic explanation? Or was it truly a brush with the unknown? As with any extraordinary claim, researchers, both believers and skeptics, have proposed various interpretations. So let's have a look at some of the main points of speculation and attempts at debunking in a balanced way. Investigators who met Jessie found no indication of a hoax. no profit was gained, no publicity was sought. Gibbons, after extensive interviews, stated that he couldn't see a motive for a hoax. Jessie in particular appeared genuinely traumatised, and the later health issues like the unexplained rash and that sort of thing lent some weight to something tangible occurring. Skeptics can counter, of course, that sincere people can be mistaken or even deluded, but there's no evidence that the Rustenbergs fabricated anything for fame or reward. Jessie's consistent retelling over the decades and her reluctance to embellish the story bolsters the credibility of it in my eyes. But what if she was mistaken? What if Jessie and her children have misinterpreted a conventional aircraft or some natural phenomenon as a flying saucer? It does appear unlikely, given the detailed description and multiple sightings. The object was low enough to nearly touch the roof of the cottage. It clearly had a disc shape with a dome. It hovered silently, which would rule out any known aircraft of that time. Additionally, occupants were observed inside. No blimp or balloon or astronomical phenomenon could present human-like figures looking down from a hovering craft. One neighbour did later report an aircraft noise at around the same time, but that was likely the other sound that Jessie herself heard that precipitated the sighting. But what that was, we don't know. If anything, you might think it was a secret military test vehicle, perhaps, or something of that nature. But in 1954, there were no UK craft remotely matching this object's description or performance. So misidentification really does seem like an inadequate explanation for what Jessie saw. Some skeptics have wondered if Jessie's psychic interests or beliefs primed her for an experience. Years prior, a medium had told her she was a gifted psychic, and Jessie did report feeling a premonitory tingle the day of the sighting. Was it a hallucination? Was it a vision? How can you reconcile this with the multiple witnesses that are involved in several sightings? Physical traces like the rash and the trauma that people felt. It was more than an internal mental episode, wasn't it? However, Jessie's openness to the paranormal did influence how some investigators viewed her. Lauren Gross, a UFO historian, considered her psychic background a potential flaw in the case, suspecting that it gives it an occult tinge. Others, like Daniels, argued the opposite. Maybe because Jessie was sensitive, she was actually sought out. No evidence ever emerged that Jessie suffered from any mental illness. The psychiatrist who evaluated her found her mind sound. The stress and nerves she experienced were consistent with a real fright. Ufologists have noted that the beings Jessie described, human-like, with long blonde hair, fit the archetype of what is called a Nordic alien or a space brother. And during the 50s, a few high-profile contactee stories, such as Adamski, featured tall, benevolent, blonde extraterrestrials, which became a bit of a trope in UFO lore. A critical question is whether Jessie knew about these stories or could have been influenced by them. Now, by her account, she hadn't read UFO books or heard of Adamski prior to 1954. She lived in a rural setting, didn't have a TV, they didn't even have electricity, and the Rustenbergs were somewhat isolated from media hype at the time. It's certainly possible she'd seen newspaper headlines about flying saucers. I mean, the topic was in the news, but there's no evidence that she fabricated details to match some story that already existed. In fact, the Express and Stare in 1954 noted that nothing Jessie said indicated that she was familiar with UFO cases at all. Over the decades, a few minor inconsistencies did appear in Jessie's retellings. For instance, in 1954, she estimated the saucer to be 15 to 20 feet, but later she said it's probably 50 or 60 feet. The number of times it circled the house was given as 1.5 in early accounts versus 3 later on. Now, skeptics point to these as signs that memory is fallible and can change, but these differences are not unusual for someone recalling a traumatic event years later. Human memory often focuses on core elements and loses finer details over time. The disc shape, the dome, the two occupants, they remained consistent every time she told it. Investigators like Jenny Randalls found her reliability as a witness actually quite high, given that she hadn't embellished the tale with each retelling. So I don't think the minor discrepancies should be seen as some kind of indicator that it was all made up. I think this is normal memory drift. This encounter is a case that straddles that boundary between the incredible and the credible. It's a quiet English farm under a darkening autumn sky. A young mother encounters something that by all normal measures shouldn't really exist, yet she and her children stood gazing at it, feeling fear and awe in equal measure. This story invites us to step into a childlike sense of wonder, contemplating who those beautiful people in the silent craft might have been and what their purpose was. And at the same time, it challenges to apply scrutiny, doesn't it? To ask some questions and probe for earthly explanations, and ultimately to acknowledge what we just don't know. Today, this encounter is remembered as a classic, one that's been told and retold in books and documentaries and, yes, YouTube videos. It has all the elements of a great science fiction tale, but it's presented by those involved as a sober fact. Jessie didn't seek the limelight. She didn't waver in her account over the decades. In an era when reporting such a thing would have invited ridicule, she showed courage in coming forward. And thanks to that, we've got this richly detailed close encounter narrative that continues to impress and intrigue researchers. So what are we to make of it? This story should be neither dismissed out of hand nor accepted uncritically. Rather, it should be studied. The Rustenberg encounter highlights how much about our universe we still have to learn. If Jessie's visitors were real, they demonstrate that advanced technology, far beyond that of a 1950s aircraft, might well be traversing our skies and even peeking in on us from time to time. If the encounter was something else, psychological phenomena or misperception, well, it underscores the complexity of our experience as humans, doesn't it? But in either case, the event has inspired many to look up at the sky with a bit more curiosity and to wonder what might well be out there. In my final analysis, the Jessie Roestenberg case remains a beguiling enigma. It sits right at the intersection of awe and skepticism. As Jessie herself wistfully said, the saddest part to me is that I have never been able to fully understand the greatness of this thing. She felt somehow enriched by it, and long after the fear faded, she regarded that brief meeting under the hovering Mexican hat as a privilege. A moment where the veil between worlds was lifted just enough to glimpse something extraordinary. And whether one believes her encounter was with extraterrestrial visitors or not, the story serves as a reminder of the vast mysteries that do exist in our world and beyond. And as we continue our own voyage of discovery through science, through exploration, and through keeping an open but discerning mind, we might one day have an answer to what Jessie saw. But until then, her experience stands as a fascinating chapter in the annals of unexplained phenomena, one that still sparks debate, wonder, and the imagination of all who hear it.